The warm morning sun stretched across Sam Walker's ranch, casting golden hues over the rolling fields. He took a deep breath of the crisp, fresh air, the scent of pine and damp soil filling his lungs. After months away on a work contract overseas, he was finally back home, ready to relax and enjoy the peace of his land. His family had owned this property for generations, far from city noise and interference. It was supposed to be his sanctuary. As he drove his truck up the long gravel driveway, something felt off. The usual vibrant energy of the place was missing. The horses in the distance seemed skittish, the birds strangely silent. Then, as he crested the hill, his stomach twisted at the sight ahead. A graveyard. Rows of headstones, neatly placed in his once pristine field. His land, his private property, had been transformed into a cemetery. His heart pounded as he brought the truck to a stop, gripping the steering wheel tightly. What the hell had happened while he was gone? Stepping out, he approached the nearest headstone. The name inscribed meant nothing to him, but the polished granite and fresh flowers suggested recent burials. His hands clenched into fists as the weight of the situation settled in. Someone had turned his property into a final resting place. And then, as if on cue, a shrill voice cut through the air. "Oh, you must be Sam. You're finally back." Sam turned to see Deborah Langley, head of the local HOA, striding toward him with a smug smile. She was the kind of woman who wielded power like a weapon, her designer blouse crisp, her expensive sunglasses hiding eyes filled with entitlement. "You have no idea how much trouble we had maintaining this place while you were away," she continued, her voice dripping with self-importance. "It was just an empty field, so we figured, why not do something useful with it?" Sam's jaw tightened. "You figured," he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "You buried people on my land without permission." "Oh, don't be so dramatic." Deborah waved a manicured hand dismissively. "It was all done properly. The HOA partnered with the local funeral home, such a great community project. Besides, you weren't even here. It's not like you were using the land." Sam's blood boiled. His ancestral land had been turned into a graveyard by some HOA lady with no right to it. Big mistake. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay collected. "And tell me, Deborah," he said, his voice like steel, "who exactly gave you legal authority over my property?" For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Well," the community agreed, "and since you weren't here, we thought." "You thought wrong." As fury coiled in his chest, Sam realized one thing: this wasn't just an overstep. This was Warreep, his hands from shaking as he stared at the rows of headstones littering his property. His family's land, his inheritance, had been turned into a graveyard without his consent. It wasn't just a violation, it was an insult. Deborah Langley, still standing with her arms crossed, let out a scoff. "Honestly, Sam, you're being a bit unreasonable. This is a community improvement project. People needed a place for their loved ones, and this land was just sitting here, unused." Sam took a slow breath, clenching his jaw. "Unused? Deborah, this is my land, not the HOA's, not the community's, mine." "Oh, don't be so selfish," she smirked, tilting her head. "It's not like you can just dig them up and throw them out. That would be, well, illegal." Her smirk widened. "Besides, the county already approved the permits, so really there's nothing you can do." Sam's eyes narrowed. "Permits? You mean to tell me someone approved this without my signature?" Deborah shrugged, looking annoyingly smug. "A little paperwork mix-up, I suppose, but it's all official now, and just think, you get to own a piece of local history." Sam's blood boiled. This wasn't a mix-up, this was theft. He glanced around, trying to process the sheer audacity of what had happened. His land, his inheritance, had been stolen under the guise of community service. The worst part? Deborah was right. If they had managed to file proper paperwork, revering this could be a legal nightmare. Deborah, clearly enjoying herself, continued. "Now, of course, the HOA will be responsible for upkeep. We've hired landscapers and will be organizing community events. Imagine how lovely it'll be: picnics, candlelight vigils, maybe even a little historical tour." She beamed. "It'll really bring everyone together." Sam stared at her in stunned silence. The absolute gall of this woman. Then she sighed dramatically. But I suppose if you're really that upset, you could try and take it to court. Of course, that would be very expensive and take years, but hey, totally your choice. She smirked again, knowing full well that she thought she had won. Sam forced a smile, though his fingers twitched with barely restrained rage. "Oh, don't worry, Deborah," he said smoothly. "I won't be going to court." Her smirk faltered just slightly. Whoa. No, Sam exhaled slowly, his mind already working. I have other ways of handling this. And just like that, he saw it, the first flicker of uncertainty in her expression. Good. Because Deborah and the HOA had no idea who they were messing with. Sam spent the next few hours walking his land, taking in the sheer absurdity of what had been done. He counted at least 30 headstones, each marking a burial that should never have happened on his property. Fresh flowers, candles, and memorial plaques dotted the area, making it clear this wasn't just a temporary mistake. The HOA had planned this for months. Everywhere he looked, evidence of their arrogance stared back at him. They had paved a small path leading to the graves, installed a decorative fence, and even put up a sign at the entrance. Langley Memorial Cemetery, maintained by the Willow Creek HOA. His fists clenched at that name. Langley, Deborah Langley, she hadn't just overstepped, she had made it personal. He spotted a few HOA members milling around, clearly admiring their handiwork. A couple of them gave him forced, polite smiles, while others avoided his gaze entirely. They knew what they had done was wrong. They just didn't care. That would change very soon. Sam pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in a while. After 2 rings, a voice answered. "Walker." "Hey, Daniels," Sam said, his tone measured. "I need a favor, a big one." There was a pause, then how bad? Sam let out a slow breath, scanning the illegal graveyard one more time. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Another pause, then a chuckle. "Try me." Sam smirked, his fury settling into something colder, sharper, a feeling he hadn't needed in years. "Let's just say, I need to remind some people who they're dealing with." A beat of silence, then Daniels sighed. "All right, I'll make some calls." Sam hung up, his pulse finally steadying. Deborah and the HOA had spent months thinking they had pulled off the perfect power move. They thought they had won. What they didn't know, what no one in this town knew, was that Sam Walker wasn't just some random landowner. He was one of the primary contractors for a federal agency. And that agency, the FBI. The next morning, Sam parked his truck near the so-called Langley Memorial Cemetery, his expression unreadable. He had spent the entire night making calls, pulling strings, and digging through records. And what he found? The HOA wasn't just arrogant, they were stupid. Sam leaned against his truck, sipping his coffee as he waited. Right on cue, Deborah Langley strutted toward him, her usual smug expression plastered on her face. "Sam," she said in a mockingly sweet tone, "I hope you've had time to think things over. Fighting this would be such a waste of your time and money." Sam smirked. "Oh, I've been thinking a lot, Deborah." She gave a satisfied nod. "I knew you'd see reason." "Oh, I see a lot of things now," he said, setting his coffee cup on the truck hood. "For example, I see that the permits you mentioned, they're completely fraudulent." Deborah stiffened. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Sam pulled a thick folder from his truck and flipped it open. "Because according to county records, the land rezoning request was never approved. In fact, the application was denied. But someone," he looked directly at her, "submitted a forged approval anyway." Deborah's face paled slightly, but she quickly masked it with an annoying laugh. "Oh, Sam, let's not get dramatic. There must have been a miscommunication." Sam tilted his head. "Right. And I suppose it was also a miscommunication when you failed to get signed consent from the legal owner of the property." Deborah's smile twitched. "Oh, and then there's the issue of the bodies." Sam leaned in slightly. "Because you see, when you illegally bury people on private land, it creates all kinds of legal nightmares. In fact, it could be considered a form of unauthorized disposal of human remains." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's a felony, Deborah. Deborah visibly swallowed. I don't handle the paperwork personally, so I... Doesn't matter, Sam cut in. Because as the HOA president, you're responsible for every decision made under your authority. He gave her a mocking smile. And wouldn't you know it, I happen to have some friends who are very interested in fraud cases like this. At that exact moment, 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled down Sam's driveway. Deborah turned just in time to see federal agents stepping out, their expressions cold and professional. Sam folded his arms. You were right about one thing, Deborah. She turned back to him, her face now a mask of pure panic. I won't be taking this to court, he said smoothly, because they will. Deborah stood frozen, her face drained of color as the black SUVs came to a stop. The moment the doors opened, 3 men in dark suits stepped out, their presence commanding and undeniable. Sam had made sure of that. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense stance, strode toward him. Walker, he greeted with a curt nod. Daniels, Sam replied, his voice smooth. Deborah visibly flinched at the name. D. Daniels, she stammered, eyeing the agent warily. As in? Special Agent Daniels, FBI. The man pulled out his badge, flipping it open with an air of finality. We've received reports of fraudulent zoning permits, unauthorized burials, and possible criminal misconduct by the Willow Creek HOA. Deborah's entire demeanor changed. Gone was the smug arrogance. Now she looked like a cornered animal. FFBI, she choked out. This is, Sam, be reasonable. You can't just call the FBI over a property dispute. Sam smirked, shaking his head. Oh, Deborah, this isn't a property dispute, he gestured to the gravestones. This is a crime scene. Daniels nodded. We're here to conduct a full investigation. Any unauthorized burials could result in multiple felony charges, including violations of state and federal law. He turned to another agent. Start photographing the site. We'll need soil samples and records of every individual buried here. Deborah took a shaky step back, her usual confidence crumbling. This is a mistake. The HOA, we were just trying to help the community. There's no crime here. Sam raised a brow. Forgery isn't a crime. Daniels added, and neither is filing fraudulent documents, tampering with county records. Oh, and let's not forget, disposing of bodies without proper legal authorization. He tilted his head. You're looking at serious prison time, Mrs. Langley. Deborah visibly trembled. And no, this is just a misunderstanding. Sam leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for only Deborah to hear. You thought you were untouchable, he murmured. That I was just some landowner you could push around. She didn't respond, couldn't. But you made one big mistake, Sam smiled. You picked a fight with a man who works for the people that put criminals away. Deborah's breath came in short gasps. And Sam, he just watched, because her real punishment was only about to begin. The scene unfolded like a perfectly planned downfall. Sam stood with his arms crossed as the FBI agents methodically went to work, snapping photos, taking soil samples, and marking each illegal grave with numbered evidence tags. Deborah Langley, the once untouchable HOA queen, stood to the side, her hands wringing together, her face drained of its usual smugness. Why, you can't just, she started, her voice cracking. I mean the community. Agent Daniels didn't even look up from his clipboard. Mrs. Langley, you and your HOA board are officially under investigation. I suggest you stop talking before you incriminate yourself further. Sam watched as the other HOA members slowly backed away, their eyes darting between Deborah and the federal agents like rats abandoning a sinking ship. One of them, a nervous-looking man with sweat beading on his forehead, raised his hand hesitantly. For the record, I didn't sign anything. Deborah handled all the paperwork. Sam smirked. There it was, the inevitable betrayal. Deborah whipped around to face the man. Oh, don't you dare try to pin this on me, Greg. You all voted for this. Greg shrugged, now suddenly very cooperative with the FBI. Actually, I was against it, but you said you had everything handled legally, and he shot her a guilty glance. Turns out you didn't. Daniels nodded, making a note in his file. Good to know. We'll be pulling financial records next. If any HOA funds were used improperly, that's another set of charges. Deborah's eyes bulged. Financial? Her voice broke as she realized exactly how deep of a hole she was in. Sam decided to twist the knife. You know, he mused, stroking his chin, I'd imagine once they audit the HOA, they'll also find all those extra fees you were charging homeowners for violations. Daniels glanced at him. Oh, you mean fraudulent fines? He let out a low whistle. Yeah, that'd be another legal nightmare. The remaining HOA members visibly paled. Wait, one woman whispered, turning to Deborah. You said those fees were legitimate. Deborah opened her mouth, but no words came out. Greg sighed, stepping away from her like she had the plague. I think I need a lawyer. Daniel smirked. Good instinct. He nodded to his agents. Start collecting personal statements. Let's see who wants to cut a deal first. Deborah staggered back, shaking her head in disbelief. And no, this can't be happening. Sam stepped closer, his voice calm but deadly. Oh, it's happening, Deborah, he said smoothly. And I'd get comfortable because this is just the beginning. Deborah collapsed onto the nearest bench, her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled. The panic in her eyes was undeniable. For the first time, the HOA tyrant had lost control. The agents were everywhere now, taking statements, collecting documents, and building a rock-solid case. Meanwhile, the remaining HOA board members had scattered like cockroaches in the light. Some whispered among themselves, clearly trying to distance themselves from the mess. Others were already offering statements, eager to throw Deborah under the bus to save their own skins. Greg, the once nervous board member, was now practically singing like a canary to one of the agents. Oh yeah, he nodded enthusiastically. Deborah handled everything. The permits, the money, the cemetery idea, it was all her. She even said, and I quote, Sam Walker won't do a damn thing about it. Sam let out a soft chuckle. That's so. Deborah's head snapped up, her eyes burning with humiliation and fury. You think this is funny? She hissed, her voice shaking. You think you're so clever calling in the FBI? Sam shrugged. Oh, I don't think I'm clever, I know I am. Her hands clawed at the edge of the bench. This isn't over, Walker, she spat. You'll regret this. Sam simply smiled. Deborah, you're about to be charged with fraud, forgery, and illegal disposal of human remains. The only thing I regret is that I didn't call them sooner. Just then, Agent Daniels approached, holding a clipboard. Mrs. Langley, he said in a bored tone, you're officially being placed under investigation for multiple felony charges. You'll need to surrender all HOA financial records for audit. In the meantime, the county will be issuing an immediate cease and desist on this property. Deborah's mouth fell open. But... Daniels held up a hand. Oh, and just a heads up, once we confirm fraudulent use of HOA funds, you're looking at personal liability for restitution. He smiled coldly. Hope you've got deep pockets. The last bit of color drained from Deborah's face. Sam clapped a hand on her shoulder, leaning down just enough for only her to hear. You wanted to make history, Deborah, he grinned. Congratulations, you just made federal case law. Her breath hitched. For the first time, she truly understood. She wasn't just losing control. She was ruined. A week later, Sam stood at the edge of his property, watching as county workers carefully began the process of exhuming the graves. Every single illegally buried body was being relocated to a proper cemetery, one that wasn't built on stolen land. The Langley Memorial Cemetery, officially dismantled. Deborah Langley, once the queen of the HOA, was now the talk of the town, but not in the way she had wanted. The FBI had frozen HOA accounts, her fraudulent activities were all over the local news, and former HOA board members were tripping over themselves to cut deals. And Deborah. She had been forced to resign in disgrace. The last time Sam had seen her, She had been storming out of an HOA meeting, screaming at her now former colleagues for betraying her. But betrayal or not, she was the one facing criminal charges. Sam smirked at the memory, poetic justice at its finest. A familiar SUV rolled up, and Agent Daniels stepped out, a satisfied expression on his face. "Well, Walker," he said, glancing at the workers clearing out the last of the gravestones. "You officially own land without a graveyard again." Sam chuckled. "Yeah, it took a little more effort than expected." Daniels grinned. "Oh, don't worry. The next owner of this HOA position will probably think twice before trying to pull something like this." He glanced at Sam. "So, what's next for you?" Sam took a deep breath, looking over the now empty land. "Think I'll rebuild, maybe put in a nice shooting range." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "For practice." Sam smirked. "No, just to make sure the HOA knows they're not welcome here anymore." Daniels laughed. "Now that's a solid plan." As the SUV drove away, Sam took one last look at his land, finally his again. Peace was restored. The HOA was in shambles. Deborah Langley was a disgraced fraudster. And Sam Walker, he had won.